Hello, everybody. I hope you're having a great day. Big changes are afoot with GW today. This article just recently dropped yesterday, and I really wanted to cover it then, but I was kind of busy, so I'm just covering it now. This in and of itself, I think, is a big development in the reveals for fourth edition. As I'm going to get into in a minute, it's really going to cover one of the big things that I felt third edition Age of Sigmar was on the right track for, but it didn't quite make it. And let me just get into in more details what I mean by that. So, major changes coming to command abilities. So, for those who remember, command abilities were easily one of the major defining points of Age of Sigmar from the second edition onward. However, in third edition, I feel they really started to integrate them more into the overall game design. In that there were universal command abilities added to the game. Now that started in second edition, but it really got pushed in third edition where there was this idea that they were trying to do where they realized that a lot of people were upset with especially second edition in that there wasn't a lot of interactivity in the game because of the random turn mechanic. There could be times where you could go two turns in a row that you're basically doing nothing while your opponent does everything. So Age of Sigmar tried to rectify that by allowing you to have abilities you can use in your opponent's turn as well as your own. Third edition I felt was on the right track in that regard, but fourth edition with the reveals we just have here, I feel they've really looked about what worked and didn't work in third edition and are fixing it up with the new refresh. So one of the big things I'm seeing is they're doing a major overhaul of how CP is generated. It's going like they really probably saw that third edition how the command points were generated was very random and it varied considerably with armies. So I understand them wanting to look back and rework that from the ground up. Some of the abilities, also command abilities, I mean, some of them are definitely very similar, if not outright the same as last edition. However, some have been vastly changed in very key ways, and some have just been added to the game outright. One another big thing that was added to the game was there's they finally and this is something I was really hoping for too. They're allowing for much more. I guess the word where I'm trying to say is free way of issuing commands. In that it's basically the same as it is in the 40k version in 40k. In that there is no range that a hero needs to issue a command. Like basically every edition up to fourth, the whole idea of commands was a hero unit was issuing a command to another non-hero unit. That's how the command worked. Or, for example, in third edition, they made an innovation to that where a unit champion could issue commands to its own squad. Or if a unit had the elite keyword, they could just issue commands to themselves without a champion or without a hero. However, then that kind of got a little bit iffy where, okay, well, then you had like totems gave you extra range, and then the general had extra range, and then there was all kinds of cheeky things where your opponent would try to like snipe out your heroes, which meant you couldn't use your command abilities. I don't know, it just seemed needlessly convoluted. I really like the new fourth edition is streamlining it in that commands are just issued from anywhere. Like you don't need range or anything to a hero or anything. It's just done. And if I think I'm reading it correctly, it doesn't seem it actually needs to be issued by a hero by chance, but maybe I reread that. It's probably you still need a hero. It's just there is no range anymore. If not, that I would like that because that is something in 40k that I do like. In that you don't need a hero to issue stratagems. You just issue them. Anyways, also I feel that there is some things in this article though that I can't tell if this is intended or if it's just poor wording, which I'll get to later in the video. It's just kind of like some people have been pointing out some of the wording that they use on some of these abilities just seems kind of odd to say the least. But then again, GW has well been known to just kind of like phone in their articles a lot with like spelling and grammatical mistakes, so it could just be just that too. But another thing I've also noticed too is just going after going over the 10 new universal commands, it does kind of seem that while obviously you can use them in your own turn, the majority of them seem to be geared towards usage in your opponent's turn, which makes sense as because one of the big selling points they have for the new edition is more interactivity regardless of whose turn it is. And this seems to be one of the major ways they're doing that, in that most of the abilities are geared towards you doing stuff in your opponent's turn, which I think is good because that's something this game was really, I think third edition just kind of didn't quite do properly. So fourth edition, I hope they correct that. So, command points and how they're generated. Well, apparently they're going to go through a bit of a revision. One of the big things they mentioned is that there's going to be a lot less ways to generate command points in the course of a battle round. But when I say that, they very much probably mean army abilities because third edition. Because if you remember back in third edition, there really wasn't a ton of ways to generate command points from the base core rules. What really happened was when we were in terms of like command point generation, that had to do with army abilities, like with the Seraphon, where their Slan could generate additional ones, or best example, the Oziark Bone Reapers, where they could generate like something like 8 command points a turn or whatever. That's where they probably meant, and they actually even made a point of pointing out that those abilities will be taken away. So the Oziark Bone Reapers, their ability to generate so many other extra command points, that's getting taken out. Now, having said that, I don't know how long it's going to last for because GW has a common tactic of saying things at the beginning of edition, but then gradually kind of breaking that promise as the game goes on. Because, yeah, like they say, they're not like there's gonna be less ways to generate command points, but how long in like a year or two from now, how many armies are going to be able to generate like 1 or 2 extra command points a turn by doing blah blah blah. Like we all pretty much have a good idea what they do in that regard. But anyways, basically how this is in layman's terms, how it's going to work now is you get 4 to start, which I think is pretty good because I think that's a good base number. But you can also get an additional one if you're the underdog. Basically, meaning if you have less victory points than your opponent in a given battle round. And also, you can also get it. And as mentioned in a previous article, you can also get an additional one each battle round if you have less auxiliary units than your opponent. So, unless I missed something, I don't think I did, but let me know if I did. It seems to be you can get a max of 6 each round. And that's also assuming you played for it. Like, you have an you didn't take too many auxiliary, and maybe you went out of your way to score less victory points in this round, so you can get an additional command point in the next round. That's pretty much how it works right there. They also did a good thing of like clarifying some too. So each unit can only use 1 command point for each phase, and each command can only be used 1 time by each army in each phase, which I think that's a good clarification because I think especially newbies might be a little bit confused. Like, no, you can use other commands in a singular phase, but you can only you can only use well one you can only each unit can only use 1 command in one phase. Yeah, that makes sense. And each command can only be used 1 time. So you can use multiple times per phase, but you can only use them once per phase. So yeah, clean, simple, easy to remember. And as I mentioned before, command ranges are gone. And after rereading it, it looks like I was pretty much right. They made a point in that they say specifically you don't need heroes to issue commands. So if I'm understanding this correctly, it seems to be that you get, as long as you have the command points, you can use commands wherever. So it's kind of it seems to be they might be treating commands more similar to how stratagems are used in 40k, in that they're not issued from any specific unit per se, but they're issued by the general, i.e. the player. So basically, you're the one issuing the commands, and you can issue them anywhere from any point. So now, so it looks like in this edition, there's going to be less, worrying about, okay, well, how many heroes do I need to babysit my big blob squad so I can get like inspiring presence on them, or your opponent being cheeky, like I said, with like sniping out all your heroes at the beginning of the game and ruining your command point economy. No, that's all gone. So I think that alone is probably the biggest change that I like from this, because I hated the whole like having to issue commands from a unit, because because even though it doesn't seem like a big deal, that one time you need to issue a command to that a key unit, and all your heroes are just going to be on the other side of the board, like nowhere in range. Like that happened more times than I like to count, and I kind of feel like it just didn't really add anything to tactical complexity. It just kind of became annoying. So, anyways, that's just my 2 cents on that. So, overall, command point generation, I think, thumbs up in this regard. I think it's okay. Now, I don't know if 4 to 6 is going to be necessarily enough for every army, because I know some are, because just by the nature of the game, some armies are going to be more command point hungry than others. But again, let's see what happens. Like maybe they'll compensate in the actual army rules themselves. Okay, so let's get into the actual commands themselves. So generally speaking, they seem to be mixed up into two different kinds of commands. There are reaction commands, and then there are just regular commands. 4 out of the 10 commands are reaction commands, and what separates them essentially is that they only are activated when a certain event occurs. Like say like for example, if a unit is attacked or if you attack another unit, etc. Again, for those familiar with fourth edition, the first two out the gate are exactly as they were before. Like all out attack, and it's activated when you declare an attack with one of your units. It just gives you +1 to attack with your hit roll. And again, it also clarifies it also affect weapons that have the companion weapon ability. Which, by the way, I think that also inadvertently explains what the companion keyword basically means. It's probably going to mean that like there are going to be certain abilities that only affect a unit but not their companion. But anyway, that's off topic. Um, all out attack and all out defense really don't have much to talk about, because again, they're virtually identical to they were before. The only real difference is that when discussing the command, it just basically they just have some more clarifications in the rule text. Like it just clarifies who is used by, when specifically the reaction occurs, how many command points it uses. Not really much else to say here. If you liked them in the last edition, you'll like them now. If you hate them in the last edition, well, tough break. But now, at the double and forward to victory, again, there really isn't any real big change with these specific commands. They're pretty much identical. Again, if this is the way they're going to be shown in the book, I do like the way they've gone about doing it. They just added a few more, like, they have built-in clarifications. Also, I must say, I think I like the way they're doing it with this design too, because while it's obviously inspired by the 40K stratagems outlay, it's a little more easier to read. But by that I mean, if you played 40K, I do like all the information and stratagems, but I kind of feel there's just a little bit too much text in there. Like they're saying, like, they have who it's used by, what does it do, like what are the restrictions. It just kind of seems like quite a bit to read, and I think I like that they kept this nice and short and sweet. Beyond that, they're pretty, like, again, at the double and forward to victory, they're exactly as they were before. Like at the double just means you don't have to roll for your run roll. You just move 6 inches, and forward to victory. Well, again, that's pretty much the same. It just lets you re-roll your charges. Again, short, sweet, perfectly good utility. And again, and these are the last of the reaction commands. In that, I was actually a little bit surprised that I thought there'd be more reaction commands in this new edition. I don't know why. I just assumed that maybe GW would put some more reactions in, like maybe some additional things. I don't even know what they would have been, but I just felt that they would have added more. But no, they just basically just kept the old ones from the last edition, which are fine. All of them are perfectly legit. They all have use, so cool, cool. Now, as for the other commands, these ones are, I think, definitely got the most attention in that they have the biggest change ups. Rally in particular has gone through a complete rewrite. So those who are familiar with Rally in the last book, well, throw out everything you learned about it. It's very different now. Essentially what the big thing with them is, well, what one thing is that, again, you can use them in any hero phase, which I do like is specified on the war scroll. I mean, not the war scroll, on in the rules, along with how many command points it counts. But a big thing about it is to, they did actually specify when they are actually utilized. So I think with these specific kinds of command abilities, they can be they're used at the end of the phase. So I think that's a good specification because it just helps with remembering stuff. Now, how does this rally work in the new edition coming up? Well, instead of how the old way where you basically just had to roll sixes, this is now you generate rally points. So essentially, what it does is you roll 66s, and every 4+ gets you a rally point. And how these work is it allows you to either return models to units and or just heal models in units. Now, the first and another big thing they pointed out is that this essentially is also going to replace. This has basically just been incorporated with the heroic recovery ability from third edition. The heroic commands, or forget the name's slipping off the top of my head, but anyway, essentially they're basically spoiling that's going away. Now to heal heroes, you use rally because it's basically the same. It's basically the same concept. Now, personally, I think this is a very big glow up in regards to this ability. Because, well, one of the biggest problems I had with Rally in the last edition was it was just a little bit too all or nothing. Like I've seen players use Rally all the time and never return a single model because, again, depending on the army, you just aren't well set up to do it, because the whole idea is okay, for a unit you roll a d6 for every model you lost, and on a 6 you return it to the squad. But like larger hordes like Skaven and Grots, like that's easy because you were rolling like 20, you were rolling like 20 dice. But units, let's say like ogres or Stormcast Eternals, like you could go your whole gaming career and never get it off. But then there's other times where you'd spike it and you'd return like 4 ogres to a single unit and just like basically just ruin your opponent's day. Like it was too all or nothing. And the problem with being all or nothing is it still costs you a command point. Like I can't tell you how annoying it is if you blow your last command point trying to rally back 10 models and not get a single one back. And then we got into even more issues where you had army abilities that returned the 6 into a 4. Like that became, honestly, I actually was joking that became like rallying on a 4+ became so common that maybe they should have just errated it that was on a 4+, because pretty much everyone had a way to make rally become a 4+. And then eventually it got so bad, which, by the way, I think was due to the Gloomspite gets. I'm not even kidding. Like their ability to abuse rally was so bad. I feel like they were the ones who legit broke the camel's back when it came to rally. Like they were just returning so many units that GW actually, not long after that, changed the rule that you can only return 10 wounds per phase for rally. And like, okay, when GW actually nerfs a core rule like that, it was being abused. So I really like that this is much more balanced in that. Okay, one thing it does point out too is it seems to be you can only ever return or heal 6 wounds worth of a unit, which is worse than it was in third edition. But because it's much more consistent to get off, in that, okay, you roll 6 dice, that means statistically you'll probably get at least 3. So I can either heal a unit 3 or return 3 wounds worth of models to the unit. At least I have a certain amount of a baseline to work with. Like maybe you'll spike it, maybe you'll go under. Either way, I have an averages now. And in addition to this, because it also allows you to heal as well, it's a lot more versatile because this makes it a lot more usable for armies with units with high wound count. Like case in point, ogres, like ogre maw tribes. Like whenever they were trying to rally, generally speaking, they would only use like two, maybe three models in a unit in a given turn, and they're trying to rally. Okay, well you're rolling three dice and trying to get a six. That's not really dependable, and it's a real big ask to lose a command point for that. But now you could roll this and you can just heal wounds back onto the unit because a lot of times you can just have an ogre maw tribes like like a gut buster unit and you just got a unit missing a few wounds. Well, you can rally and heal that unit back up. That's all good. Like that's much like unit and I honestly think that's even better because this can apply to almost anything now. Let's say like monsters, heavy cavalry, heroes, like anything like things that will actually value healing more than bringing models back. Because more often than not, like a unit of like Man Crusher Gargants or a unit of Storm Strike dragons, they're more than likely they would want to heal more because they more than likely have a unit just on one wound rather than missing units. So yeah, big thumbs up for me there. Now, on a personal level, the rally change I really liked, but from a tactical scenario, this I think is probably the biggest glow up of all the command abilities, and I do not say that lightly. Okay, so redeploy was a big deal back in third edition because it was the way it allowed units to essentially move in your opponent's turn. Like this had grave tactical significance because it basically allowed you to interrupt your opponent as they were moving. Now, this has been changed somewhat in both a very good way, but it's also going to change of how you tactically use it. So before, redeploy allowed you to move a unit d6 inches if an enemy unit ended a move within 9 inches of them. Well, now it's been changed that after at the like in your enemy movement phase, and I believe it's at the end of your enemy movement phase, you can basically pick a unit that's not in combat and you can just move them d6 inches. The big caveat with this though is that it's no longer triggered by a unit getting within 9 inches. So you can basically just use this command ability and just move a unit d6 inches anywhere on the table. This is huge because there are so many like different scenarios you can do with this, like d6 inching a unit to block off an objective, to d6 inching back onto an objective, blocking off a unit from that was about to be charged. There's just so many ways you can use this. And the biggest change that I like from this is that it removed that 9 inch restriction because I found that while in theory it was a good idea because obviously the way they intended to when they were working it was to keep people out of easy charge range. But what was happening is that your opponent was just cheekily keeping themselves perpetually out of 9 inches, and there were so many ways, especially towards the end of the game, for like re-rolling charges or units that rolled like more than 2d, like rolled like 3d 6 charge or just got shot off the board. It was just too easy for your opponent to kite you in that regard. So I think this is much more tactically flexible because again, it's not dependent on what your opponent is doing. See, that was the problem with the last one. Your opponent could dictate whether or not you could use this or not and where you could use it. Now you get to decide where it works. Another big thing, and again, this does bear repeating. This is the big thing. Uh, Unlike the last ability, though, it takes place at the end of the phase. So what that means is that after your opponent is done moving all of their units, you then get to move a unit d6 inches. I believe that's how they phrased it. And if so, that can also be a bit of a restriction because one advantage the old ability had was that it happened automatically. As soon as a unit moved within 9 inches of your unit, you could immediately move that unit, which basically meant you could do cheeky things like, like immediately block off a unit when it's obvious it's going for a charge. But now no, your opponent gets to finish all their movement, then you get to do it. So you lose some tactical reactionary effects in that you can't immediately make a move to counter an opponent's move. But once you see where all your opponent's units have moved to, then you can decide where on the table you want to move to. So while you lose some reactionary tactical flexibility, you make up for it with a more grand strategy tactical flexibility in that you don't necessarily have to build your movement around what your opponent's doing. And I think that, and another thing, this also is the first instance of where it's specifying keywords. So redeploy also seems to have the move and run keyword. So basically, what that means is that this D6 movement probably means it counts as a regular move, but it also counts as that you're running. And as some people have pointed out online, this makes perfect sense, is because if it counts as running, it basically means this is probably meant to stop you from doing a redeploy and then doing a counter charge later with that same unit, because it's all because you probably can't run and charge in the new edition as well. So that's actually a pretty good clarification. And I also like that it's a good way of building in restrictions without using text, because like, okay, well, if it has the run keyword, you count as running. You don't have to put it like you have to like put a restriction in text saying, this you cannot use the counter charge command if you use redeploy, which I think was was an annoying thing in the last one, because yeah, they had to do specifications for like for example, in third edition there was like, okay, if you redeployed, you can't, it specifically says like you cannot fire Overwatch if you redeploy. Well, this is a much more cleaner way of doing it, because it keeps text off the page and just puts it somewhere more easily accessible. So two big thumbs up in that regard right there. So I think overall this in my opinion I think is one of the biggest glow ups of all the commands, that along with the rally. In fact, maybe like I said, maybe arguably the biggest glow up. I know some people might not like that it's not as reactionary as before, but I think this is I think this is a big thumbs up in my opinion. Okay, now covering fire. This one, this is less of a this is less of a favorite of mine as the changes to redeploy, but I think covering fire also got a very big glow up in the new edition. Well, in that again, it's no longer reactionary. The last editions I feel cover like well, I think it wasn't really called covering fire, it was like unleash hell in the last edition, and it was basically just meant to discourage enemy chargers, for those who remember that. This one I feel is again more tactically flexible in that so essentially, similar to redeploy, it's no longer reactionary on what your opponent is doing. Like your opponent doesn't need to charge or be within range of charging of something. It just you basically just you spend in your enemy's shooting phase, after they're all done firing off all their shooting. You can just pick one of your units, and it can immediately shoot the nearest enemy unit with its ranged abilities. But the caveat being that they get -1 to hit. Again, this can be very good for tactical flexibility. Not as much as redeploy, mind you, because there are the big restrictions. The biggest one being it has to be the nearest visible enemy unit. So you can't just snipe out a character that you need to do. You have to pick the unit that's closest to you. So this can be a little bit more tricky to pull off at times, because again, sometimes the unit closest to you isn't really the one you want to shoot in your opponent's turn. So that being said, I do like that it is still a little bit less restrictive as the last one. Again, another problem with shooting in Age of Sigmar is that this isn't 40k. Not every single army is pretty much like has some mass amounts of shooting. Like some armies don't care at all about shooting. So this has less universal usage, but it's much cleaner. It's much more tactically flexible, and Honestly, I think it's just I just think I like the way it operates now because I just didn't like I just didn't like the old rule without it was just again it was just so dependent on what your opponent was doing because again your opponent could just if they knew how the if they knew enough about how the rule worked, they could very easily just work around the rule to like charge units that are farthest away from your shooting units to kind of kite you in that regard. So again, this is more flexible. So countercharge is the first, I would say, completely new command ability. There was nothing really in the rules that allowed this, and as a lot of people have pointed out too, this is the first that has officially of the new command abilities has a higher command point cost than one. It costs 2 command points to use countercharge, and I think for good reason. So basically, what it allows to do is at the end of your opponent's charge phase, you can pick a unit and they can charge in as well. And since Age of Sigmar is still very much more based around combat, this has a ton of utility that people can utilize. Now, some keen-eyed viewers have pointed out too. This is basically the command one of the army traits for the cities of Sigmar. They have an ability that allows them to charge in your opponent, like to charge into combat in your opponent's turn. So I think this is a bit of a spoiler that cities of Sigmar are going to be getting a rules rewrite in the new edition, but that goes without saying. Um, basically, as for new additions to the command point system, thumbs up right here. Like, look, charging in your opponent's turn is always a good thing. It always has usage. So this is just good all around. Not sure how if I feel do I think that it needed to cost 2 command points? Probably, maybe, I don't know. My issue in regards to this is just because, like we were not like command points are going to be a lot more scarce in the coming edition. So I don't know if it really, if I think even just 1 command point would have been may have sufficed. But you know what? There's probably a whole bunch of like combos I'm not even thinking of right now. So you know what? They probably know more than I do because they know the other rules that are coming with it. So as I said before, this has some major synergies, especially with some command abilities that are coming up. Like for example, imagine like you getting an ability off in your opponent's turn and then charging them in after getting it off in there, or case in point right here, charging in your big stomper hero in to back up your other units, or chart or like counter charging a unit that just got revealed by another unit charging in. Like case in point, you got Scragrot the Loon King back there, but he was being protected by all those squigs. Well, they charge into combat. Well, now he's free. Then you countercharge into Scragrot because he just lost his screen. Like, that's just an example of the synergies and stuff you can do with this ability. Like, I think honestly, I'm not gonna go too much more into it because like the amount of synergies that you could do with this are insane. And you know what? Now that I'm thinking about it, probably 2 command points was appropriate for this because this has major implications that now that it can be used by any army. Now another new one that's just been revealed is magical intervention. Now this also is something that just bear repeating. Even though it is called technically magical intervention, it actually applies to both wizards and priests at the same. So for those armies who only have priests and no wizards, don't worry, this will apply to you too. So what does this basically do? Well, it's basically the same as all. At the end of your enemy hero phase, you can cast a spell or a prayer as if it was your own turn, and just use the same rules that the spell or the prayer would have usually done, just in your opponent's turn. I think as people have been pointing out, one thing I'm seeing online is basically people thinking of ways like they can spam spells that can do mortal wounds, like for example that one Nagash has. However, I think one thing that I think people are missing is this could also be very much used for buffing spells as well. Um, Case in point right here. Remember all the one of those synergies I was talking about with like countercharge? Well, actually, what I think it was Rob from Honest Wargamer Gaming, the Honest Wargamer, who came up with this. But he says that hypothetically, you could actually use this. For example, you can use this on a wizard, cast a spell to buff up another combat squad, and then at the end of your opponent's charge phase, you could then countercharge that squad you just buffed up with this magical intervention. See, you see what's going on here. Like this is what I've been talking about with greater interactivity in your opponent's turn. Because if you can do that, that's just an example of ways that you can literally, activate like not just basic unit functions, but actually combos of your own army in your opponent's turn. Because that was one of the big thing that was missing in the last edition. One of the big problems with third edition's command abilities was that they were too dependent on the restrictions. They were too reactive. Like they depended on your opponent doing something, like coming within 9 inches of your unit, or charging a specific unit that was in range of a unit that could fire Overwatch, or sorry, Unleash Hell. They there was just there were there your there was just too much. There was just too many ways your opponent to kite you, and a bigger problem was they were too basic. They only let you do certain things, like you could only move, or you could only shoot. There was no ways to do combos with that necessarily. Well, okay, yes, there was, but they were very basic. Like this alone opens up so much possibilities. So just think of like just think of all the way like all the spells that you might have, and just think, what could I have done with them if I could do this in my opponent's turn with a unit that I could then charge in with, you know? Or a unit you could then shoot with. Like okay, like think about like that spell that gives all your shooting mortal wounds onto hits. Like imagine now I do that, and then I can just shoot that unit at whatever. You know, like this is it. This right here is one of the missing links that the last edition missed. In that we don't just want simple reactions. We want ways to do combos in our opponent's turn as well. And this right here is a big step in the right direction in that regard. Yeah, like the only thing I need to know is what kind of spells and prayers we're gonna get. Because case in point right here, the second those start getting revealed, everyone is now gonna start thinking, okay, but what can I do in my opponent's turn with all these? Like that's stuff you got to think about going forward. Power through, in my opinion, I think is probably the one that I was probably least excited about, but I can definitely see the reason for it to exist, and also the tactical reason for it to exist. For those who probably remember, this is very similar to that Beast Claw Raider monstrous action they have for their Stonehorns. It basically, like in layman's terms, what it does is that when a unit is in, now case in point, also it doesn't have to be a monster. That is a big thing for there. This is not a monstrous action. I don't even know if monstrous actions are even going to be a thing in the new edition, but this just applies to any unit. So basically, how it works is if a unit that just charged this turn is in combat, as long as it can pick a unit that has a lower health characteristic than it, so basically a smaller unit. Or if the unit legitimately has a high health count, it has to pick a lower health count unit, and they basically can use this ability. So essentially, that unit immediately gets inflicted D6 mortal damage, which I guess are mortal wounds, and then it can immediately move through that unit as if they're not there, up to its move characteristic, and it can end within combat, but only with that unit, or it can end outside of combat. So basically, from like a lore perspective, this is kind of like the equivalent of a big like monster or chariot slamming into a unit of infantry, doing a bunch of damage, and then moving through them and just keep going. Like you probably seen a movie of a chariot hitting into like a shield wall. Well, it smashes through the shield wall and just keeps going through. That's basically what this is to do. Now, at first glance, this probably might just seem like it's just like a way to do damage to a unit. However, I don't really feel that's the main takeaway from this. I think the big thing that this thing exists for is it's to keep smaller units but with high health counts. Let's say like a monster or a chariot. Units that tend to be isolated and alone. This basically exists to keep them from getting bogged down by horde units. But because now, what I mean by that is one of the big problems monsters have had for a very long time, even in third edition, is that often they can get that when people want to charge them in, they get isolated and alone in on the board, and then when they run, and then they get run into like a big blob of other units, like clan rats or knight or grots or even just free guild steel helms. They get caught in there and they can't get away. Like they just get bogged down and then and get gradually chipped away because they tend to a monster tends to be less durable than a large blob. What this does, however, is that what this allows you to do, it gives you the option of charging in, doing some damage, but then getting out of it, keeping the monster from getting bogged down forever. Because that's all in previous editions. That was a big thing people did to counter monsters. They're like, okay, well, I can't necessarily, I don't know if I can kill this monster, but I can tie him up in this with this cheap squad of infantry and just keep him there the whole game. Like that was often a pretty good counter to isolated monsters. Well, this in and of itself will keep your monsters from basically just being, stuck wading through like legions of guys and never getting anywhere. Like obviously you would like to wipe the squad, but sometimes that's just not always an option. And I know for a fact this is one of the reasons they did this because they did this specifically for Beast Claw Raiders so that their stone horns wouldn't fall into that very trap. Because the whole point of the Beast Claw Raiders was using your big monsters, but no one wants their monsters to get stuck in like an infinite pile of self-regenerating clan rats. So now you don't have to worry about that. And again, and I know I'm talking about monsters a lot, but this doesn't have to apply just to monsters. This can apply to just about anything as long as it has a bigger health characteristic. So yeah, like just reading it over, yeah, I'm not seeing anything that says it can't apply to anything. So essentially, this could also apply to, let's say, like I said, chariots, but it could also apply to things like like gut busters, like or like iron guts, and like for example, you could use this from a unit of iron guts on, let's say, like a unit of, oh, I don't know, like cruel boys, like some meat, like cruel boys or grots or whatever. Like yeah, they can just go in, plow through, and just keep on going. So yeah, that like I'm just thinking like that's just examples of like synergies you can use for this in the coming editions. Now, assuming I'm reading this correctly, and I'm pretty sure I am. Now another thing to do is this will probably also have many units that have ways to boost this thing's attack output, which I'll get to in just a second. Now, very now similar to what like late third edition War Scrolls did with command abilities. Like an example of that they used in like in the article just shows ways that certain War Scrolls can give bonuses to command abilities in the new edition. Like for example, a good one would be like those like Gloomspite gets. The Snarlfang Riders got like a bonus that I think that they could re-roll the roll when they redeployed. Now, well, that's carrying over into the new edition with things like the Stormstrike Chariot. So, for example, when like it gives an example here where if you use the power through command ability on the Stormstrike Chariot, they get a bonus. They get bonus damage when they use the ability. So obviously the intended idea is that you save the use of that command for this specific war scroll. Um, Now, I also mentioned earlier that there was maybe some weird wording on the like on some of these. This is one of the ones I was talking about in that some people have pointed out that it's kind of weird how they worded a D3 die roll, but it only works on a 2 up. Um, I've never quite seen them do that when referring to like a D3 roll. I'm assuming that means that a roll, if you're using a D6, a roll of a 1 or 2 fails and only a roll of 3 plus will work. Um, I guess that's how that works. I I don't know. Hopefully they clarify that in the future. But rules is written. That seems to be how it's supposed to work. But anyway, that's besides the point. What I'm trying to say is that this is probably going to be far from the only war scroll that has ways of buffing the commands. Like for example, some people I've seen actually give pretty good examples. Like for example, rally. Like I don't think there's going to be army abilities that's going to buff rally, but I think there's going to be like individual war scroll abilities that will. Like for example, I'm thinking like maybe something like clan rats, probably clan. I think clan rats, and this is just a theory. I'm not basing this on any evidence, but I think clan rats will probably have an ability to buff rally when you use it on them. Like for example, when you use rally on them, you roll 2d6 instead of 1d6 when you're getting them, or similar with Gloomspite gets. Maybe they'll have like an army ability that they re-roll the die when you're using rally or something like that. Or for example, Caradron overlords, like maybe when like for example when you use the shooting, the out of phase shooting command to shoot in your opponent's turn, maybe they'll have an ability where that they can shoot any unit, not just the closest one. Like that's just some things we're probably going to see in the new edition. I don't know what exactly that's going to happen, but GW has very much meant that they want to cut down on the amount of unique rules, and one of the ways they can do that is integrating command abilities right into the war scroll. Because not only does it cut down on endless text, but it also helps with just streamlining the rules, especially for beginners. Because now they know what it'll help them remember what command abilities do, especially if it's integrated into their unit abilities. So overall, there I think I pretty much like everything that's been changed so far. Like sure you can nitpick some stuff here and there, but no, overall this is a major glow up from the previous edition. And also it shows that GW was serious about their commitment to want to put some more interactivity, and not even just interactivity, but also tactical flexibility in your opponent's turn. Is As I was saying, third edition was on the right track with ways you can do stuff in your opponent's turn, but it just wasn't quite there. Like I said, it just didn't do enough. I felt it just, it was too easy for your opponent to, mitigate it in a lot of ways. There was just stuff that needed to happen to really make it like, bring it over the edge. And I think fourth edition is a major step in the right direction. Now, obviously, we'll need to see more of the rules, but just from the command abilities alone, I think there's going to be a lot of changes up to how tap people approach the random turn and how they're going to mitigate it. Overall, probably my favorite changes are probably to both redeploy and rally. Redeploy it's just become so much more like realistically tactically flexible, and rally I think is just finally found that middle ground where it's not so much the all or nothing we got in the previous edition, and also it's also made in such a way that it's probably going to be less hurtful for your opponent, for your opponent if your army has ways to alter the role. Like for example, I think the day people are ready to lose the days of endless 4+ rallying. Like I think no one really wants that anymore. Um, and also, there seems to be also ways you can also do much more combinations in your opponent's turn as well. So overall, I think these are some major changes coming, and I think they're all changes for the better overall. Now I will say though, I'm kind of wondering what's going to happen with command point generation. How, like for example, how long GW is going to keep with this whole idea of there's not going to be ways to generate additional command points, but we'll see what happens. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video, and have a nice day.